James Pearson's book, Camelot and the Cultural Revolution, is the best book ever written about the Kennedy assassination. And it is about the liberal reaction to the Kennedy assassination, because liberals to this day have pinned it on the white supremacists in Dallas. And that's just crazy. He was killed because he was an anti-communist. I mean, that's pretty clear that Lee Harvey Oswald killed John F. Kennedy because John F. Kennedy was anti-communist. And we now are starting to piece together that he may have felt he was acting on orders from the Soviet Union.
Just give me Cuban Missile Crisis kind of 101, a little bit of what led up to it, and what his decision-making was that ended up being so wonderful.
So Nikita Khrushchev is the premier of the Soviet Union, and his new client state in Cuba, ever since Fidel Castro had taken over in '59. And Khrushchev sent nuclear missiles to Cuba, so they'd be 90 miles away from U.S. territory in Florida. When this is discovered, Kennedy tells the Soviets they have to get out immediately. The Soviets don't agree. Tension could lead to the firing of missiles, and Kennedy gets Khrushchev to face down. Kennedy gets him to say, okay, we'll pull our missiles out. And it was big egg on Khrushchev's face back in the Soviet Union. One tidbit about that. The documents that came out in November on the presidential assassination do seem, just this past November, just a couple months ago, do seem to indicate that Khrushchev gave the order after that humiliation to all networks globally that Kennedy should be assassinated. And Lee Harvey Oswald may have begun his preparations because of that directive.
Wow. All right, so I do want to talk about the assassination, obviously, and even just the way you said that there's so much of it that's hard to piece together, and how far do you want to go down the rabbit hole and follow the conspiracies and all that, but we will get to that. But what was the final moment that got Khrushchev to turn down? I mean, did Kennedy basically say, well, I know there's the line, of course, but was it really communicated like this is going to be World War III right now?
I think to answer that question, we have to speak Russian and have access to the archives, because I think what happened is that Khrushchev felt pressure at home. As a lot of people have said, the Soviet Union really was a status quo power, and the Politburo began asking Khrushchev, are you going to take our lives away from us? Are you going to take our summer dakas on the Caspian Sea away from us, and our 10% of us in the Soviet Union who have a nice life? What are you doing? Would you please back down? It seems that whatever Kennedy was doing, the real folding happened on the Soviet side. And Khrushchev was not the first among equals. I mean, he was barely premier of the Soviet Union. So it seems that, and we don't have enough information on this because it's behind these source walls, that the Russians backed down because they realized Khrushchev was acting crazily.
Yeah. This may sound like an amateur question, but did they ever actually speak, the two of them, through translators? Was there ever, or everything goes through the communiques?
Geez, I'm going to have to review. There's a great book on this called One Hell of a Gamble, which has all the documents. It's an amazing book by Ernest May and Phil Zelikow from the 1990s, so let's look that up.
Yeah. How much after the Cuban Missile Crisis, I mean, that really changed everything in American foreign policy, right? I mean, it really was a huge catalyst for a lot.
Well, we argue in our book that the big change, foreign policy-wise, came a year later when Kennedy countenanced and assisted in the assassination of the South Vietnamese President Diem in November, just a couple weeks before Kennedy's assassination, and that seems to have been the tipping point in Vietnam. I'm telling you, I've been listening to a lot of the Kennedy tapes on Vietnam with McNamara and everything else. It is true that Kennedy had no real interest in a long-term war in Southeast Asia. No, he didn't. What on earth he was doing helping to assassinate Diem, and I have no idea, and that was a big mistake.
So was that really just because he had this, again, he had this thing drilled into him from his father from childhood about communism, and maybe that overrode the intellectual part of him that said, let's not get into these intractable wars?
Yeah, I think Diem in Vietnam was one of those people that maddened Kennedy because he, again, like King, he didn't want you to bring him into his circle and then have you burn him. You know, Diem was the American guy. Yeah, he's our guy in South Vietnam, and he just kept alienating people and making life difficult for the monks and everyone. And Kennedy's like, hey, you're supposed to be our guy, and I'm John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
So at some point, Kennedy will break and just said, okay, you're gone. Gone, in this point, meant assassinated. And that is rare in the Kennedy ambit, and it ended up being not good for American and Vietnamese fortunes for the next 10 years.
Yeah. What else do we need to know about just sort of the personal side in terms of what was going on in the White House during those years?
Yeah, I mean, he ran an elegant White House and all that. He did have his girlfriends really kind of did that side of him did desecrate the White House, and I think we have to understand.
How much do people know? I think it's hard for people to understand in a modern sense of what could it before social media and before everyone had a phone and all that.
Yeah.
Like, what did the average person know about that at the time, or what was the media even saying about that?
Well, kind of the wisdom of crowds. I think the electorate largely understood what was going on, even though there's no hard evidence in the papers and so forth, and there really wasn't any hard evidence. I mean, now we know about his swimming nude and this with the pools and the Secret Service having to hold his drinks and all that stuff. I mean, we know all about that now. Judith Exner may have been killed by the communists because she was a plant and all that. Not Judith Exner, but Gifford Pinchot's niece. I believe that because Kennedy had so many kind of crazy affairs in the White House, the press felt that it was burned. Like, we're not allowed to report this. And that's really what gave us Watergate, because Nixon's things were kind of small in comparison. And the press was like, we got burned then, we're not going to get burned again.
Wow, that's fascinating. I've never heard anyone lay it out like that. So basically, they kind of played along with JFK because they were trying to be nice. Maybe he was a little bit of their guy, sort of. But then it ended.
But they felt embarrassed by it. I mean, they felt used.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just shutting up about this.
Yeah.
And then the next time a suggestion of that came around, they just went with a sledgehammer.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So, all right. So obviously we have to talk about the assassination. Tell me a little bit, just in the weeks leading up to it, what was going on in the presidency?
Yeah, I think that was really Kennedy's highest time as president. Thurston Clark has written a great book about Kennedy's last 100 days, from August to November 1963, about he really was coming into his own. And I think that's true, actually. He kept talking to the Secret Service agent, hey, isn't this a great day to be alive? I mean, he was really into it. His tax cut was going through, his civil rights cut was going through, the Soviets were gone. He just assassinated Diem, that's the footnote. So
how public was that, by the way? Was that?
Oh, it was public, yeah.
It was completely public?
Well, no, it was presented as a palace coup, that it was internal. So the American fingerprints were not clear at the time. And his ambassador, his new ambassador, Henry Cabot Lodge, who he defeated in the Senate race in the 50s, was kind of the fall guy. So it appears that he put somebody in Saigon who would have to endure the dirty work. So aside from that, Kennedy's enjoying watching Polaris missile launches, and he's laughing at the Senate Finance Committee, which is trying to hold up his tax cut. And he's just like, you guys can try to hold it up, but you know I'm going to win. So he's really kind of coming into his own. And then November 22nd.
Yeah. So what was it? You know, I don't know how to ask this question properly, because everyone's seen so much about it, but the news starts breaking, and it's hard to imagine what breaking news would be like at that time now.
Right.
Can you kind of frame that a little bit?
Yeah, we can see these. They're on, YouTube. So soap operas back then were live. So they would be live actors, acting out the soap opera. And they were broken into, and you can watch these again on the internet right now, with bulletins from Walter Cronkite and so forth, saying that there's been an incident in Dallas, the president's been shot. And then they would go back to the live acting, and then the actors would just start acting again about the drama of the soap opera. But it took probably about 45 minutes to an hour for people to realize that it had happened.
Yeah. When did the conspiracies start popping? Like, immediately were people going, something is wrong here? You know, why was he taking this sort of circular route around with the topless car and all of that stuff? Like, were people immediately doing that?
Well, yeah. I mean, the trip to Dallas itself was controversial. It was in the planning in October, November, because Dallas was a hotbed of kind of what we might call white supremacy. And people were, and Kennedy said it's nut country down there. They're kind of anti-Kennedy, even though they voted for Kennedy because of Johnson on the ticket. So everyone was worried about his not getting a good reception in Texas from the kind of, call them racist, whites, if you want to use those terms. But the trip was totally successful on those counts. He went to Fort Worth and a huge celebration, and he went to Dallas, and everyone loved him. And the last words perhaps spoken to John F. Kennedy were from Connolly's wife in the car. Well, it's all over now, and you can't say that Texas doesn't love you. And then he was blown away.
Wow, incredible. So, I think the first time that I paid any attention to this was probably in high school when I saw the movie JFK.
Yeah.
I assume you've seen the movie
Yes,
JFK.
I have, yes.
So how far, as someone that really cares about this and a historian and all that, I mean, how far down all these rabbit holes are you willing to go? It sounds like some of it's still unfolding as new documents still come out. But just for you, as someone that is interested in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple aspects of the assassination that we have to take seriously, that we have to kind of lose our sophistication about, oh, Oswald acted alone. No, hold it. Dealey Plaza is the best place possible for an assassination. That's where it happened. That should interest us in terms of conspiracy theories.
Can you explain why? I mean, there's that slow turn, there's just the points of vision, all of it, right?
It's at the end of the parade route, so the parade is over, and then there has to be a right turn and a left turn that goes then downhill. So the parade's over, which means the intensity of the experience is over, and the Secret Service's interest will start to wane, and that was absolutely essential in the assassination. Then, so there's that setting, and there's a school book depository right there within the grassy knoll, and an overpass too at Stemmons Freeway. It's a perfect place for assassination, so therefore we should stop this pseudo-sophistication about, oh, Oswald acted alone. The other thing too is Kennedy was absurdly good at making enemies. I mean, he just made enemies. I mean, his father made enemies for a living.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, we've talked for 45 or 50 minutes now. We haven't even said in military-industrial complex once, which obviously had some issues with him, which we can touch on as well.
Right. So, and Oswald also had connections to beat the band with the mob, the Soviets, the Cubans, I mean, so that's also very fruitful. Jack Ruby, Oswald was killed. Jack Ruby has connections to beat the band. So these are all suggestive. Nonetheless, James Pearson's book, Camelot and the Cultural Revolution, is the best book ever written about the Kennedy assassination. And it is about the liberal reaction to the Kennedy assassination, because liberals to this day have pinned it on the white supremacists in Dallas, and that's just crazy. He was killed because he was an anti-communist. I mean, that's pretty clear that Lee Harvey Oswald killed John F. Kennedy because John F. Kennedy was anti-communist, and we now are starting to piece together that he may have felt he was acting on orders from the Soviet Union.
What may have felt? That's an interesting way of phrasing it. What do you mean may have felt?
Well, Oswald is quite a character, and what was going on in his head, we don't know. We do know that he met, he went to the Cuban embassy to meet a Soviet assassination expert in September 1963. The documents that just came out imply that it was understood in late 1962 that Nikita Khrushchev, after getting burned in the Cuban Missile Crisis, may have sent out some kind of broad order into the global Soviet network that it would be desirable if the President of the United States were assassinated. And that order may have been called back because of pressure within the Politburo. Hey, Khrushchev, you're still acting like a nut. Khrushchev was forced out in 1964. But once you squeeze the toothpaste out of the tube, it's darn hard to get it back in. Yeah. So it may be, this is speculation, but grounded in some sources, that Oswald was part of that initial outreach and then may not have stopped and then went ahead with it.
Yeah. So basically, you're willing to go down these routes. You sort of have to. I mean, the more I read about this, and the more of these documentaries I watch, I've got a Carl Sagan book right there, and I always quote, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Right.
So I don't know that we have the extraordinary evidence, but there were so many pieces in play here that make it seem hard to believe.
Yeah, I think the one thing that is firming up pretty well is that Oswald killed Kennedy because he perceived Kennedy to be anti-communist. So it was the left that killed Kennedy because Kennedy was too right-wing. That's been lost over the last 50-some years. Yeah. That is firming up through a lot of sources. That's the most important thing, I think, to conclude. Then what the deep story of Oswald's connections are, okay, that's interesting. From the grassy knoll, no, there's no shot from the grassy knoll. It's impossible. Anyone who's been to Dealey Plaza realizes that's a physical impossibility. All that stuff. It does appear very clearly that Oswald fired those bullets. He hit the traffic light, then he hit Kennedy in the neck, then he hit Kennedy in the magic bullet. That's very easy to see with a heavy cased bullet, full metal jacket. Yeah, that will act that way. The ballistics aren't a question. Oswald shot Kennedy.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.